Hello and welcome, star people. This is Outlaw Astrology, a podcast that explores the cosmic connections between history's most notorious criminals and crimes with a touch of the inexplicable and unexplained. I am your host, APM, your intrepid star guide and cosmic detective, and this is episode 2 of season 8. And before we dive in, a quick reminder to like, share, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. Thank you very much if you're enjoying the program. And now let's set our celestial sights on one of the most infamous cult murders in history, the Manson family murders. Now in this episode, we'll be examining the astrological aspects surrounding the Manson family murders, seeking insights to the climate of the late 1960s, during this shocking series of events. And we'll explore the planetary positions, zodiacal influences, and celestial events that coincided with these notorious and darkly terrifying and gruesome acts. Okay, so where we left off in last week's episode, which was episode 1, this is episode 2, by the way. And I'm APM once again, and what we're going to do is start off with Jupiter. So I said that Jupiter and Uranus were conjunct in Libra in the 5th house, and so they were transiting Charles's 5th house at the time. Now, in the negative, Uranus is very disruptive and highly erratic, and Jupiter tends to overdo things, overblow things. And so in the 5th house of dating, pleasure, hobbies, creativity, these creative energies would be put forth to do terrific harm and horrible acts of cruelty, and would be one of the darker places in history, in cultural history at this point. And so that is a really big vision, a really big plan, but highly disruptive, and also could be highly negative because it did have some rather horrific events. And so that Jupiter and that Uranus would be hanging out at that point. Now looking at his Chiron, would be Chiron at the time of the crimes, the Tate LaBianca murders and all of that at that time, would be at 6 degrees of Aries. And for Charles, that is his 10th house. And he has his moon there and his north node. So Chiron would be conjunct that north node. And this is rugged individualism. That's the thing about Aries energy. It's highly rugged, it's individualistic, it's I get mine, you get yours kind of energy. But it's also, I need to follow my own way, do my own thing, and follow my own path, which is a very big thing for Charles Manson. He didn't like being told what to do. He didn't like being told what to think. But more importantly, please don't tell him what to do. He liked to go his own way. And so we've got the north node surrounded by the moon, and we've got Chiron there with old wounds. So someone who is left alone to be highly self-reliant. And he was a doomsday prepper, keep this in mind. And he was at Span Ranch, which was not actually his ranch, and was also an old movie set once upon a time. Isn't that curious? That he would find a home with his Manson family members, meaning his family members, at what was once a set used to film westerns. At a time, also a time in history, by the way, where there was forward expansion and the horizon was the limit. You know, it was big, it was pioneering, it was trailblazing. The Old West energies play a great deal of what makes America America. I mean, what makes the U.S. the U.S. And so the Span Ranch was actually part of what was once upon a time old Western studio set. And it was very rural and where you would probably wait out the apocalypse, which is what Charles Manson was doing. Now, when you've got Chiron in Aries transiting, because it would be transiting on top of his moon and his natal moon and his north node, old wounds would be brought up. Being out in the public image of being rugged individualism and doing your own thing in a world where outlaws are sung about romantically and sentimentally in folk songs, which was something he was trying to do, was very curious. It was quite unusual that it would bring up old wounds. And to be fair, it happens with a lot of people who get celebrity. Because he wanted to be famous, he got what he wanted, technically. He just didn't get it the way he wanted to get it. He wanted to be a famous musician, and he wanted to save the world, or at least save the world so that he could recreate the world in his own image and do what he wanted to do in that world. It just didn't work out as planned. Okay, so those are also some of the energies. Now, what I said last week is that not necessarily just because something is in a chart doesn't necessarily mean that you have no choice. Yes, it's there. Absolutely. But that does not mean that you have no choice. That you have choices to the degree that you are capable of being able to use those choices. And to be fair, there are certain predetermined circumstances in our lives that we don't get a choice about. And where we are born and to whom we are born and what skin we are born in, we don't get a choice on that. And gender, we also don't get a choice on that. So I'm very much aware of the fact when I speak of choice, that sometimes you have to play the hand you're dealt. And when you play the hand you're dealt, you don't always get the choice. I mean, you get the choice to a degree that you can play nice. But sometimes people learn the opposite lesson, which isn't that they want to play nice. Now, this is all the backdrop of the late 60s, which is the Age of Aquarius. As a matter of fact, there was even a song about the Age of Aquarius by the Fifth Dimension, about the dawning of the Age of Aquarius. And so people were really looking to become and to create, to become the people who created that progressive, secular, enlightened society. But keep in mind, these same people who had these ideas 20 years later, at least, had suddenly become the absolute epitome of the establishment. And they became the yuppies of the 80s period and put on ties and suits, and all of those values got left behind in the 60s. Because a thing to note is ideals and idealism is not meant always to be perfectly rendered and manifested. They're meant to be measuring lines. You're meant to measure how far I am, so you'll know where you came from and where you went. And so Charles, when we're looking at that chart, that's what we are seeing. Now, his Mercury is turning, the Mercury he has is in Scorpio and is at 2 degrees. Mercury on these murders, starting on the 8th, it was at the 1st degree of Virgo at 25 degrees. At 25 minutes. What that means is it's sailing across his Mars and his Neptune placements. And it's forming a sextile to his natal Mercury placement at 2 degrees of Scorpio in the 7th house. This is happening from the 5th. So at that time, it's pinging his thoughts, his ideas of how to fix things, or it's pinging his Neptune in Virgo, which is not a comfortable placement for that, because Pisces is the sign in affinity with Neptune, not Virgo. Virgo's too analytical. Whereas if it's in Pisces, it's a bit more idealistic. And so this was an opportunity to slow down and analyze the situation and analyze those creative ideas to put them to better use, so that if you're going to make a change in the world, you can do so from a more idealistic place by having ideals, which he did. It just so happens that Mercury flew over and it was in the sign of its own home, where it's most comfortable. And now there are these ideas, very shifty ideas, analytical ideas, efficient ideas of how we can improve the world and make the world a better place. And it's tying into that Mercury, which is why. Yeah, but why? As you understand people. Now you can talk a good game. Now you can creatively channel your ideas into verbiage, into a thought system, and a creative thought system that you can then sell to other people. Because Mercury is the ultimate salesperson. If you're in a business chart, it'd be the part you look at for how to speak to people. So it's the ultimate salesperson. It would be in the first degree in the fifth house. So that is where that Mercury went, and that's the part of his chart it pinged. Venus was at 5 degrees of Cancer, so an exaltation kind of homey, absolutely. But it was in the third house, so it was starting to activate that third house. Now, keeping in mind, natal placements are natal placements. They are activated by progressions and transits. So transits are what's happening in the sky at any given moment. In 1969, on the date of these murders, Venus was in Cancer. And so it would be joining all that energy co-present in his third house. So at some point activating all of that energy in the third house, including his Pluto, which ruled, that Schott called that seventh house, which is a stellium, including his Sun and his Mercury. And what that tells me is that it's going to start pinging on his north, not his north node, his part of fortune. What that tells me is the ability to be caring and nurturing, or at least to give that impression. Because Venus is about attracting. How are you going to attract people? You need a honeypot. So you need to be able to say the right words, the most charming words, the most wonderful words. And so he told people, come here, you will belong. And the reason why I'm saying this when I should be talking about murder is because he had the ability to convince people who knew right from wrong, absolutely, who knew that you can't just go around killing people and then walk away and create a better world. That it wasn't going to be like that. It just so happens that they were so idealistic and believed him so deeply because he talked a really good game and he was very nurturing. And that Venus is, how do you attract people? You become a honeypot of being protective, of being caring, of being nurturing. You belong here. You belong here. You can stay here. Tapping into that most of us have suffered childhood traumas, and most of us still have wounds from childhood that we still have to deal with. And so being able to talk into that, to charm people into that, to make people feel loved. So he fed people, he clothed people. And that made them feel grateful to him. So of course, they were open emotionally to wanting to help. So on the day of the murders, he had the ability to say, let Papa show you how to hurt people, which is what he did. On the 9th, and the 10th, he actually went out with people and said, let me help you, let me show you how to do it. And then he buzzed off to where he buzzed off to, and people had to hitchhike back to the ranch whilst others stayed and did the dirty deeds. You understand? So that is the current energy of what's going on at that point. Now let me see Saturn. I've already mentioned that. I already did that. Sorry, talking out loud. It really does help me think. Neptune, at the time of the murders, joins the Sun and all of his satellitum, his stellium in the 7th house in Scorpio. Neptune, the planet of delusion, joins all of that energy in that house. It is the last planet, so it sails over all the others for most of that for a certain period of time in the 60s. It sailed over the others and joined them at 25 degrees. It was about 7 degrees off from both, 7 to 8 degrees off from both the Venus and the Sun. And keeping in mind, that is a combust. You could consider it combust, meaning that's all sun, all shine, but he does have the ability to charm. He knows how to be charismatic. And add that Neptune there, and boundaries would tend to kind of be not there, okay? Neptune is idealistic, but it doesn't necessarily do its best work in Scorpio, okay? So it has to learn new tricks, and some of the tricks it learned was how to make people feel like they belong, make them feel like they're part of something bigger, to give them a philosophy, to tell them you're going to change the world, and also have a worldview or philosophy they can glom onto that's eventually going to be the result of a lot of death and a lot of people not being alive anymore, and also a lot of young people's lives being totally disrupted, even to this day. Because some of those people had futures that ended up just merely being potential because they're serving time in prison for the rest of their lives, even though some of them have tried to not serve time in prison. So, I know that sounds weird, but anyway. So at 25 degrees, Neptune comes in and it's dissolving. It dissolves egos. And it's, let's see how close. Let me see how close. So the Sun is at 19 and Neptune is at 25. That's 6 degrees. So not combust and by transit. So the natal Sun is in Scorpio at 19, and transiting Neptune is in at 25 of Scorpio. That means dissolving. So it's dissolving ego of the relationships of the people around him. Their egos start to get dissolved. What right and wrong is, what their values are, they suddenly don't know as much anymore, because spending time with people who think the way Charles thinks, and there are quite a few people doing that, all thinking the same thing, you stop losing your ability to think for yourself and to hang on to your values, because Venus also speaks to values. So his ability to convince you that his values were your values, and that Neptunian quality to dissolve values made it easier for him to convince young people who had never gotten in trouble before that time to suddenly do horrible things. Now, does this absolutely say that the reason why this happened was because of these planets? No, planets don't make you do anything. But it's a way of helping you understand. It's a lens for which to look and make sense of the world. The world is chaotic. Things are always coming at you. I am a neuroatypical person. The reason why I mention that is because stimuli, which is everything in the world, is constantly coming at me with no filter, and astrology provides a filter. And so what I'm trying to do for you is provide you with a filter, because I am providing darkness, not glorifying that darkness, but providing darkness for you. Why? So that when you face darkness, you have a lens for which to start to make sense of it and then to ground yourself. If you understand who you are and you understand other people, because through understanding Charlie and his darkness and what that darkness, what the stars can say about that darkness, can help you understand yours. We all have darkness. That's the whole point here. The reason why I'm doing these darker episodes with quotes is because we all have darkness. And in seeing other people's darkness, it's easier to recognize theirs than it is to see our own. So if you see his, you can say, yes, I could look at his story and say to myself, I can totally understand, coming from a chaotic circumstances, and how this could possibly lead to a person like him, as improbable as it may seem, doing the things that he did with other people. I'm absolutely fascinated by cults and conspiracy thinking. And the reason why I am fascinated is because I always thought, like most people do, that stuff could never happen to me. But then I see a story like this, and I read about the people that these things happen to, and then I start to think to myself, am I so certain that I could not be taken? Because if you had told these young people that one day they would meet a man who is highly charismatic and magnetic, and he would tell them a great story about how they could save the world, and they want to do that. They're young, they're impressionable, they're idealistic. It sounds great. And you had said to them that this would result in them losing their beautiful futures, would go up in flames, and it would cause serious loss of life and leave a permanent black mark and scar on the psyche collectively. They would never have believed you. And I understand why, because this is what I would call black swan events. So let's look further. So what I didn't do, so we're going to do is I'm going to do very quickly. Tex Watson was born on the 2nd of December 1945. He is a Sagittarius sun. And that means that his sun, and he's still in prison by the way, his sun falls in Charles's eighth house of grief, of loss, of death. So his sun falls in the early part of Charles's 8th house. And he, with Patricia Krenwinkel, and Ms. Krenwinkel was born on the 3rd of December, also Sagittarius sun, 1947 this time, and her sun is also located in Charles's 8th house of death and destruction and transformation. So, potential transformed. The ability to go forth, explore, and experiment gets truncated into a totally different experience in which they get to experience all the darkest taboos and the darkest side of life, as in murder, prison, jail, all that sort of thing. And then there's Susan Atkins, who was born on the 7th of May 1948. And that makes her a Taurus, which puts her sun sign in Charles's 1st house. And let's have a deeper look. She's an early, a second decan, so hanging off of his creative intelligence asteroid Pallas is at 8 degrees in Taurus. No, 5 degrees, 5 degrees. So co-present with his ascendant and co-present with his creative intelligence, which is about turn on. It's about, being comfortable. It's about doing what he wants and getting what he wants, basically. That doesn't mean that all Taurus energy is like that. It just so happens that this is what it looks like when it's Charles Manson. And so what that tells me is that, there's a certain part of Charles's ascendant that made Susan feel very comfortable, that felt almost like it was her. They would have had a lot of, take it life slow. He probably would have come at her with take life slow, enjoy life, that kind of, embrace your turn-ons, because that's basically what he told everybody, that, they should embrace their turn-ons. And so that's probably how he grabbed her. And by the way, she is now no longer with us. On the 24th of September 2009, she is now gone. And so these were the people that helped him commit the murders. Now, Sharon Tate was born on the 24th of January 1943, and that makes her an Aquarius. And that would put her sun in Charles's 10th house, which makes, public, very public. And so her death and her life became very public. She was just beginning her career, and she was expecting her first kid. She just gotten married to Roman Polanski, who went on to have his own challenges. And so, very public. Her name and her life becomes public and notable for the failure of utopian ideals. Because Aquarius is idealistic and utopian and looking into the future for a secular, enlightened world, and Sharon Tate's death and etc. speaks to the fact that those utopian ideals eventually failed, given that almost everybody who had them eventually went on to put on suits and become the yuppie guppies, whatevers of the 80s. So these ideas were quickly abandoned once everything exploded in the late 60s, early 70s. And let me go a little further. because this is, like I said, this is very, very fascinating, energy. And the reason why I say so also is because, as I said, I used to think these people were broken people who would fall for this. And I realized that every cult leader, everyone, has always sold people on the idea that they are making the world a better place. Applewhite did it. Jim Jones did it. And Charles Manson also did it. Keith Raniere. Is it Keith or Kenneth? I can't remember. It's if Keith or Kenneth Raniere. His name is either Keith or Kenneth Raniere. I know I can look it up, but I don't want to because he did horrible things, so I'm trying to forget him. But people like that, they sell the idea that they have a knowledge that no one else has, that you're part of some secret club, and that this secret club is somehow superior because you're in the know, you're with it. Nobody else is with it. They're not on it at all. Okay? So that is part of the reason why I do this, because I want to understand humanity. Because my 10th house is in Scorpio, and it's, but why? Why do people do the things they do? And I feel that astrology can help. So let's try one last thing. And to clarify, it was Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys that I believe, and Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys that he had hung out with, and so got a taste, because I think he stayed with them for a bit and got a taste of the rock star life, which fueled his fantasies and fueled his dreams and fueled his passions and eventually his rage. So let's move on from this and look at Jay Sebring. Jay Sebring was born on the 10th of October, 1933. That would make him a Libra. And that would put his son, in Charles Manson's 5th house. He was all about, Sebring, if I recall, was a hairdresser, a celebrity hairdresser, so about beautifying. And that would make him a 2nd decan, so probably about around the same degrees. Would put him about maybe 14, 15, somewhere between 10 and 14 degrees. And so about making things beautiful and attractive, And so in the 5th house of Charles Manson, so what I'm doing is called a mixture of synastry and a mixture of mundane astrology that I've kind of cobbled together, because I had no intention of doing that, but I am doing it. And so we have Pluto and Neptune in a sextile. In this chart, Pluto is at 23 degrees of Virgo, and Neptune is at 25 degrees of Scorpio. And that Pluto would be transforming the 5th house. Is it the 4th? Sorry. I'm having some sort of a day here, so yes. The 5th house and that Libra would be in the 6th of beautification. So that Jay Sebring's son, is in the 6th house, and those are daily routines and self-improvement, making things beautiful. Okay? And Pluto would be joining his natal Neptune and Mars in the 5th house of creativity and speculative things. By the way, it's also gambling, speculative. So he's speculating. Mercury also joins here on these days for these murders. So he's speculating on what kind of future he could create. And it doesn't hurt that he can use this mission to settle some old scores, like you do. And that puts Chiron. We already talked about that, so we're not going to do that again. I believe in this chart. Let me look, because I may have misspoken. I want to correct myself. Sorry. So Chiron is in a sextile with his North Node and his Moon from the 12th house. And that's stuff you can't see, things that are hidden. So you're not going to see his wounds. He's not going to let you see them. If you're particularly perceptive, you can see that he is a person who has had to become self-reliant and exist outside of a system that, in his opinion, is corrupt and unfair. And he's not going to lead with that, because a person like that wants to be in control and wants to rule, and it wouldn't be helpful for him to be showing his wounds to everybody. So the 12th house is about rest and retreat. And he did retreat from the world to Spawn Ranch. Okay? Just to give you some ideas. So I could definitely go on and on with his chart. And so if I haven't said, yeah, I have said so. And all these starting from the 8th of 1969 going all the way to the 10th of 1969 resulted in 5 people in a loss of life, and eventually a trial that started in 1970, in which Charles Manson got to use that trial to set the stage for his thinking, how he perceived the world, his worldview, and what he wanted to do with the world. And at those trials, family members would literally crawl all the way to the courthouse to show their devotion. The 3 young ladies who were being tried with him, literally, when he shaved his head, they shaved theirs. Whatever he did, they did. And they would sing on their way to court. They dressed up in pretty gowns and sang on the way to court, which must have been very unnerving for some people, but other people might have seen it as a flagrant disregard for the legal system, the legal proceedings, and for the lives that they took. They seemed carefree and careless. Okay? So these are some of the ways that you can look at a chart and draw things out. Now, am I saying that the stars made Charles Manson and these other people do the things they did? Absolutely not. You still have a choice to the degree to make the most out of what you have been given in life. Now, Charles Manson wasn't given a lot and chose to go the way that he chose. That is what he chose to do. However, the stars, as I've said, can help you make sense of you. The whole point isn't to look at Charles Manson and make assessments on astrologically, also the time astrologically of what was going on. The point is to look at darkness that you see outside of yourself, because it's safer to see it outside of you, and to look within yourself and be aware and mindful that that same darkness you see outside of you, you also have a piece of it within you, to whatever degree. And that not everybody starts out their life intending to go a dark way or to be highly self-interested. That sometimes circumstances and one's lack of knowledge of oneself and how to navigate the world sometimes works against you. And in Charles Manson's case, this was to his detriment, the detriment of everyone in his Manson family and the victims who had their lives tragically cut short because someone wasn't able to make the best use of whatever talents they had. Now, having said that, this will be the end of this particular episode. We're going to start with a fresh episode on a dark theme for episode 3. So please stay tuned. I am APM, your intrepid star guide and cosmic detective. We're hunting down the darkness within ourselves, within life, and within each other so that we can illuminate it. And once again, if you have not heard, I have a newsletter called The Daily Stargazer with its own podcast. And there is that in the show notes. I will link that there. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate you. And until next time, keep your feet on the ground and your eyes to the stars. Peace.